In a small, bustling hotel in the heart of the city, a young woman named Claire stood behind the front desk. It was a busy Saturday night and the air was thick with excitement. Guests rushed in and out and the noise of laughter and the clinking of glasses echoed from the bar nearby. Claire was used to this chaos. She had worked here for over a year and she loved her job most of the time. She smiled brightly at the guests, checking them in with grace and efficiency. But when a tall man walked in, dressed in an elegant suit that looked far more expensive than anything she had seen before, her heart skipped a beat. He exuded confidence, yet there was something about his presence that unnerved her. As he approached the desk, Claire felt a mix of admiration and caution. "Good evening," he said smoothly, a hint of charm in his voice. Claire glanced at the computer screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "James Palmer," he replied. The name was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "Ah, yes, Mr. Palmer," she said, trying to sound professional. She handed him the key card with a smile, but something in her gut told her to be wary. It wasn't just the suit, it was the way he looked at her, like he was always 2 steps ahead in a game of chess. "Thank you, Claire," he said, looking right into her eyes as if he were memorizing her features. At that moment, Claire felt a little tingle of something she didn't want to acknowledge. It was just a spark, a flicker of interest, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had seen her fair share of trouble in this line of work, and she was determined not to lose herself in flirtation. "Enjoy your stay," she replied, forcing her voice to remain even. James took his key and turned to walk away, but then he paused. "Could you send up some extra towels, please?" She nodded, noting the request. As he stepped away, her attention snapped back to the desk. She had other guests to tend to, and she pushed her thoughts about James to the back of her mind. Hours passed, and Claire's shift moved at a dizzying pace. Late evening turned into night, and most of the guests had settled into their rooms. The hotel began to quiet, wrapping itself in a soft, comforting lull. That's when she saw him again. James strolled down the hallway, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He walked right past her desk and gave her a casual nod, a slight smile dancing on his lips. It was undeniably charming, and for a fleeting moment, she felt herself soften. Just then, a bellhop named Mark sauntered by, pushing a cart filled with refreshments. "Looks like Mr." he chuckled, leaning against the counter. Claire raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed. Mark grinned, his eyes dancing with mischief. "He's an important guy. You can usually tell by the way he carries himself." A slight frown crossed Claire's face. "I don't care how important he is. This is a hotel." Mark shrugged, unfazed. "Sure, but it's just a game they play, you know. They want to feel special." "Sounds annoying," Claire replied, but deep down, a tiny part of her was curious about James. Why did he seem different? As the minutes turned into an hour, she felt her mind drifting back to him again and again. There was an air of mystery around him, something that piqued her interest, but she reminded herself quickly she had a job to do. Finally, as the clock struck 1, Claire couldn't shake off her thoughts. She picked up the phone and dialed the suite. "Mr. Palmer, this is Claire at the front desk." His voice was smooth and warm, a mix of casual and polite. "Actually, yes, of course," she replied, a little surprised by how easy it was to fall into this rhythm. After hanging up, Claire turned to grab a bucket when Mark leaned over the desk again. She protested, but her cheeks flushed a little. Maybe it was just the long hours and the late night talking. Okay, Mark held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just be careful." With a sigh, she took the ice and headed toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she felt her heart race. She couldn't deny the thrill of being this close to someone so intriguing. The elevator hummed softly, and when it finally opened on the top floor, Claire stepped out, glancing down the long hallway. She walked to his room, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The door stood slightly ajar and she knocked gently. "Come in," James called out smoothly. Claire hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with the soft glow of city lights filtering through the curtains. James stood by the window, a glass of champagne in hand. He turned, his eyes widening with delight when he saw her. "Ah, my ice has arrived," he said, grinning. She chuckled nervously as she handed him the bucket. "It's perfect." His voice wrapped around her like a warm blanket. For a moment they stood there, the tension palpable. Claire could see the glimmer of mischief in his eyes, and she felt her defenses slipping like sand through her fingers. "So tell me," he said, leaning casually against the wall. "It's busy," she said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible, "and sometimes exhausting, but it's also rewarding." He asked, his tone playful. "Maybe," she answered, unable to hide a small smile. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You tell me," she replied, her heart hammering in her chest. In that instant, the world seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, caught in an unspoken connection. But then, the bellhop's earlier words echoed in her mind. "Just be careful," she whispered to herself, breaking the moment. James tilted his head, a smile still playing on his lips. Yet, as alluring as he was, Claire felt the weight of caution tugging at her. She was drawn to him, but the boundaries of professionalism held her back. "I should go," she said, stepping back toward the door. "Wait," he said, his voice low. Claire hesitated, her instincts warring with her curiosity, but just as she turned to leave, he stepped forward. The intent in his eyes shifted, the playful banter replaced with something more serious. His words hung in the air, creating a magnetic pull that was hard to resist. Something about it felt like a challenge, a test she couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the way he said it, a blend of authority and charm that made her pulse quicken. A spark of triumph danced in his eyes, and in that moment she felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. Perhaps call it a mistake, a moment of weakness, but she took a step closer. "Sorry, I just thought you were different," he said, his smooth voice echoing in the lavish room. "I don't care about your status," Claire shot back, her voice steady, yet her heart raced. He chuckled softly. The question hung between them, filled with tension and uncharted territory. Claire fought to catch her breath, knowing she was teetering on a cliff's edge. The room seemed charged, and for just a moment Claire forgot everything: her job, the rules, the world outside. She saw a man who was interesting, compelling, and unlike anyone she had met. "All right then, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A smile broke across his face, equal parts victory and intrigue. And in the dim light of the hotel suite, Claire found herself on a path she couldn't quite turn back from. The night was not just a job anymore. It was a chance, an invitation, and she felt alive in a way she hadn't expected. The evening air was thick with tension when Claire found herself standing at the front desk of the Oakwood Hotel, a bustling haven for travelers. The grand lobby, adorned with gleaming chandeliers and plush couches, felt alive with whirring conversations and laughter. Yet beneath the surface of this vibrant scene, Claire could sense an electric murmur of something more. As she checked in a family with tired eyes and restless children, the door swung open and in walked a man who could only be described as captivating. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and there was an undeniable aura about him. It was the kind of presence that drew attention and demanded respect. As he approached the desk, Claire's heart raced, but she shook the feeling off. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as silk. Claire glanced at her screen, her fingers momentarily frozen. "James Palmer," he replied, and the name struck a chord. It wasn't just another booking. James Palmer was known in certain circles as a man of influence, wealth, and mystery. "Mr. Palmer, let me pull that up for you," she said, still maintaining a professional demeanor, though a flicker of intrigue sparked within her. With each keystroke, she reminded herself of the importance of keeping boundaries. The world of hospitality had taught her that charm could hide a lot of darkness. She found his reservation and handed him the key card with a polite smile. "You're in our finest suite, Mr. Palmer." "Thank you, Claire," he said, making her name roll off his tongue with a peculiar weight, as if it held significance. Just before he turned away, he glanced over his shoulder. "Of course," she said automatically, her heart thumping oddly in her chest. There was something about him that made her more than a little wary, but she dismissed it. She dealt with all sorts of guests, and some were more trouble than they were worth. The night wore on. Claire thought about James occasionally, but her focus was on the other guests. The hotel hummed with life, laughter, and the clinking of glasses from the bar. Just as she began to lose herself in the rhythm of her work, Mark, the bellhop, strolled over, an impish grin plastered on his face. "Did you see, mister?" he chuckled. "Catch, that sounds like trouble," she replied, crossing her arms defensively. Mark shrugged, leaning against the desk nonchalantly. "Oh, come on, you know the type. Handsome, rich, he's probably used to getting what he wants." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Both," Mark said with a wink before he ambled away, leaving her to contemplate the duality of power and charm. As the hours slipped by, the evening took on a softer tone. Conversations dulled, and the bustle turned into a calming hum. It was then that she spotted him again, James Palmer, lingering near the bar. There was something magnetic about the way he carried himself, the subtle confidence. And then he caught her eye, holding her gaze for just a second longer than necessary. Then, against her better judgment, she answered his silent challenge. "Need something else, mister," she called out. He moved toward her, a smile playing on his lips. "Just seeing if you could spare a little ice," he said easily. With a nod, she picked up the phone, her pulse racing again. She hung up and grabbed a bucket before heading toward the elevator. As the door slid shut, the cool metal enclosed her, and for a moment she found herself wishing she could avoid this interaction altogether. But deep down, a part of her wanted to understand this man who seemed to defy the usual rules of engagement. When she reached his suite, the elegant door stood slightly ajar. Claire knocked gently, but before she could step back, his voice floated out, rich and inviting. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open, stepping into a room bathed in soft light. He was standing by the window, a glass of champagne in hand, looking out over the shimmering cityscape. It was both striking and surreal, this moment suspended in time. "Ah, ice," he said, turning to face her with a grin. As she handed him the bucket, their fingers brushed briefly, just a lingering touch that sent a wave of heat coursing through her. Perhaps it was the champagne, or maybe the ambience, but the air crackled with something unspoken. For a moment they simply stood there, caught in a charged silence. Using her best professional voice, she asked, "Is there anything else you need, mister?" He took a slow sip from his glass, eyeing her with a mix of amusement and interest. "Tell me, Claire, for every glittering moment there's 1,000 dull ones," she replied lightly, trying to keep it casual. "True enough." He asked, stepping closer, his presence unapologetically magnetic. "I prefer stability," she said, crossing her arms in a protective manner, but she could feel her resolve weakening. James tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her heart race. I care about respect, she countered firmly. A slow smile crept across his face. And what if I told you that I could offer you respect? Claire blinked, feeling those walls she had built begin to crack. Every instinct told her to resist, but there was a comfort in his gaze that drew her in. Maybe you are royalty to some, she remarked, her voice firm, yet curiosity peeking through. Then allow me to impress you another way, he said, his tone growing serious. His words struck her like lightning, igniting a debate in her mind. On one hand, she felt the gravity of the man who stood before her. On the other, the impulse to reject such a demand was strong. But there was something intoxicating in the way he said it, a dance of power and allure, and she found herself weighing her response. Claire asked, trying to sound defiant, even though every fiber in her body was curious about the thrill it might bring. Because it's not about the title, he replied, stepping even closer, his voice low and inviting. It's about the game. As he spoke, the lines between her duties and her personal feelings began to blur. So it's a role you play like an actor. Precisely, he said, his eyes glinting with delight. And right now, you're the only one I want to see in this play, so what's it going to be? She felt that familiar tug, the thrill of curiosity battling against her better judgment. The hotel was her world, her sanctuary, but tonight, everything felt different. Walls were closing in, and she was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't fully understand. All right, she finally said, her voice steady, though she felt a storm swirling inside. If that's how you want it. His smile deepened, a flicker of triumph lighting up his features. Now that's more like it. Suddenly, the room felt electric, each unspoken word filling the air between them. Claire's heart raced as she realized that what had started as a simple interaction tumbled into something complex. It was a mystery she had yet to fully unravel. You've got a lot of layers, Claire, he said, stepping a little closer, his intensity wrapping around her like a spell. Layers that are best kept hidden, she shot back, instantly regretting her abruptness. He replied smoothly. She held his gaze, feeling vulnerable yet exhilarated. Then let's make it a game, he said, leaning back against the wall with casual confidence. You don't have to reveal anything. The thrill of intrigue ignited in Claire, overshadowing the caution that had governed her thoughts since the moment he had walked through the door. Maybe it was the champagne he had downed, or maybe it was the fantasy of just chasing a fleeting moment of excitement. Whatever it was, the challenge hung between them, thick and intoxicating. But just as the tension soared, reality crashed back in. She was working after all. The hotel had rules and she had responsibilities. Claire felt the weight of professionalism anchor her thoughts. I really should be going, she said, backing away, realizing how close they had come to crossing a line. The air grew heavier and she felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. He seemed unfazed, a knowing look playing on his face. Maybe, she said, taking a step back toward the door. But I need to put my job first, he challenged smoothly as if he valued her response. I can't afford to fly right now, she shot back, firm in her resolve. His expression shifted, and for a moment Claire could see a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, like a tightrope balancing between choice and consequence. Very well, he said, breaking the silence, his voice steady. Yes, I do, she said, backing toward the door with a hint of reluctance. She bitterly regretted how easily they had crossed into dangerous territory. As she left the room, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would linger long after she had returned to her duties. She was entering a realm that challenged her instincts, a strange dance of power and tension that she had never navigated before. Mark asked, leaning against the wall, his smirk unmissable. I'm done for tonight, she muttered, brushing past him with a mixture of emotions swirling in her gut. Mark raised an eyebrow, catching the nuance in her voice. Claire shot him a glare before pushing through the lobby doors, leaving behind the ornate walls that had witnessed her dance of intrigue. James had been an enigma, a puzzle she had barely begun to understand. While she felt the thrill of the unknown still pulling at her, she knew that the true game was yet to unfold. Back in the stillness of her room that night, Claire sought solace in silence, replaying every glance, every word shared. She was in a world where the lines between duty and desire blurred, and she knew that tomorrow would bring more than just routine. Tomorrow would be a chapter yet to be written, a chance to decide whether to continue the game or walk away from the tempting edge. In the end, it wasn't just about James Palmer or his charm, it was about what she could choose for herself. Would she delve into those layers he had teased, or would she keep them hidden away, in a world that felt both thrilling and fraught with consequences? Only time would tell, and as Claire lay awake, excitement coursing through her veins, she knew she was ready for whatever awaited her next. The lounge of the Grand Vista Hotel buzzed with life on a crisp Friday evening, laughter mixing with clinking glasses. It was a perfect night for the guests who drifted through the lavish lobby, the warm glow of chandeliers casting soft shadows around them. But behind the polished marble desk, Claire felt the undercurrent of tension and instinct that something unusual was about to happen. As she handed a room key to an elderly couple, the elevator doors chimed open. The moment she laid eyes on him, her stomach tightened. He stepped out, tall and confident, dressed in a tailored suit that hugged his frame perfectly. His dark hair was sleek and neatly combed, and for a heartbeat the world faded into a blur around him. He strode toward her as if he owned the place, exuding an energy that demanded attention. "Good evening. I have a reservation," he said, his voice smooth and steady. Claire glanced at her screen, her fingers quickly tapping away at the keyboard. "James Palmer," he replied, and the name struck a chord that reverberated through her mind. This was not just any guest. James Palmer was a name whispered in certain circles, a man of power and influence known for his charm and ruthlessness. "Right, Mr. Palmer," she said, maintaining her composure though a flicker of nerves danced in her stomach. She pulled up his reservation and handed him the key card. "You're in our penthouse suite, but I'm afraid we can't accommodate your request for an early check-in." His expression shifted slightly, a flash of surprise followed by a flicker of annoyance. "Is that so? I'm really sorry," Claire interrupted, sincerity in her voice. The sharpness in his eyes softened just a fraction, and he nodded, clearly regrouping. "I understand." He took the key with a polite smile, but his gaze lingered on her a moment too long, a message unspoken hanging between them. "Enjoy your stay," Claire managed, even though something twisted inside her. Women in her line of work had long learned to build walls against moments like this one, but this man felt different, dangerously intriguing. As the hours dripped by, she tried to drown out thoughts of him, pouring her focus into her duties. Each check-in and check-out blurred into the next, but as the sun dipped lower, shadows began to stretch across the lobby floor, and Claire caught sight of James once more. He was leaning against a polished bar, his presence like a magnet drawing attention. Guests laughed around him, but he appeared comfortable in the silence of his own thoughts. Just then Mark, the bellhop, ambled over with a cheeky grin. "Heard you turned down Mr. Palmer's request." "I had to," Claire replied, fighting the warmth creeping into her cheeks. Mark chuckled, leaning against the desk. "You know how it is. A man like him can usually bend the rules in his favor." "I think he can find plenty of that elsewhere," Claire said, trying to sound dismissive, but a butterfly of uncertainty fluttered in her stomach. Mark winked before darting off to assist another guest. She rolled her eyes, shaking off the ridiculousness of it. But soon enough, her thoughts returned to James. There was a charisma in the way he moved, a magnetic energy drawing everyone in. A few minutes passed, and she found herself glancing toward the bar again, only to see that he was now looking back at her with a knowing smile. Claire felt a tug of curiosity mixed with a sense of caution. What was it about him? She couldn't pinpoint it, but there was something dangerously thrilling beneath that polished exterior. The night wore on, and after a couple of hours, Claire was relieved to see the majority of guests settling into their rooms. The lingering noise faded, leaving only a soft hum of the bar in the distance. Just past midnight, while Claire was updating the reservation list, the phone rang. She picked it up, the familiar voice on the other end sending a shiver down her spine. "This is Mr. Palmer." There was an ease in his tone, as if he thought the request was a given. "Of course, Mr. Palmer," she replied, surprised by how her heart raced. She scribbled down his requests and headed for the elevator, unsettled yet invigorated. As she pressed the button, the elevator doors slid shut, isolating her in the small space. A wave of adrenaline surged through her. The world blurred outside the sleek glass, and her mind raced back to the encounter at the front desk. He was just another guest, she reminded herself, and yet there was something in the way he said her name that kept echoing in her thoughts. When the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, she took a deep breath and stepped out. The hallway stretched before her, elegantly decorated with art that whispered sophistication. She approached his door after a moment's hesitation, her heart thundering against her ribs. As her knuckles rapped against the door, she could hear the soft ambience of jazz wafting through the air. When he called, "Come in," his voice was warm and inviting. Opening the door, she stepped into the softly lit suite, her pulse quickening at the sight before her. James stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights that sparkled like stars against the inky sky. He turned at the sound of her entrance, a charming smile spreading across his face. "Ah, my ice has arrived," he said, taking the bucket from her hands. His fingers grazed hers just long enough for her heart to skip a beat. "I also brought some towels," she said, quickly fabricating a professional demeanor, even though her emotions swirled like a storm. Just what I asked for," he commented, moving back to the bar. His movements were fluid, elegant, but there was a hint of casual confidence that both intrigued and unsettled her. His words sent a shudder of uncertainty through her, blurring the boundaries of their roles. "It's my job to offer good service," she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "True," he said, pouring himself a glass from the champagne bottle, "but it's also rare to find someone who pays attention." "I'm not here to impress you," she said, a hint of defiance coloring her words. He replied, a teasing glint in his eyes. An uncomfortable heat rose in her cheeks. I really should go." "Come on, Claire," he said, taking a sip of his drink while his gaze pierced through her defenses. "Just a little conversation." The tension wrapped around them like a thick fog. Claire's heart raced, and she felt the uncharted territory closing in. Was she really considering indulging this conversation? Life, business, your dreams. There's so much to learn about each other. James leaned back casually against the bar, a playful grin dancing on his lips. Her mind flickered to the warnings she had heard through the years: don't get involved, keep your distance. But there was an excitement in the way he spoke, a challenge sparking her curiosity. She drew in a breath, the air thick with magnetic tension. Fine, she conceded, her instincts tussling with exhilaration. Perfect, he said, his smile deepening as he gestured to the couch. A mix of apprehension and thrill surged within her as she crossed the room, her pulse racing with each step. Settling into the plush fabric, she felt the faint hum of excitement course through her. James took a seat across from her, the city lights framing him in an ethereal glow. He leaned forward, genuinely interested. She hesitated, fighting the urge to reveal too much. His eyes sparkled with intrigue. She waved a hand dismissively. He lifted his glass towards her, a hint of challenge in his eyes. Claire swallowed hard. Here was a man who could take her anywhere she wanted, who understood that desire for more. Yet the weight of caution loomed, the seductive promises of adventure balanced precariously against her reality. I can't, she said firmly, feeling the swell of disappointment rush back. He leaned back, tilting his head slightly, as if genuinely wanting to understand. Sometimes we trap ourselves in routines. She considered his words. In her heart of hearts, Claire longed to escape her polished, predictable world. But every cautionary tale echoed in her mind, the consequences of letting go, of losing control. I have a job to do, she replied, her voice unwavering. James stared at her, a quiet intensity in his gaze. What if being your most authentic self is exactly how you do your job? He was pushing her buttons, and she felt the walls she had built come crashing down piece by piece. She challenged, unable to resist the pull of their conversation. Every day, he shot back without hesitation. With each passing moment, she found herself entranced, not just by him, but by the idea itself. She always played it safe, but what if adventure could be part of her world too? You'd think someone like you would have it all figured out, she said with a hint of sarcasm, pushing back slightly, searching for grounds to hold on to. He chuckled softly, that magnetic charm weaving its way into her defenses. Suddenly, everything shifted. He leaned closer, his expression shifting from playful to earnest. We all have layers, parts of ourselves we hide from others. For a second, the world outside faded away, and it was just the two of them, two souls dancing between uncertainty and excitement. Claire's heart raced with unnameable longing. Here was a man who saw her not just as a desk clerk, but as a person with hopes and dreams. She whispered, suddenly unsure. Every moment, he said, his voice low and magnetic, drawing her in. But sometimes it's not a role. Hesitation clawed at her as she weighed those words against everything she knew. The truth lingered just out of reach, tantalizing and terrifying all at once. To dive into the unknown with someone like him, it was alluring, but what would it lead to? Glancing at her watch, she felt the urgency of time slipping away. I really should go check on other guests, she said, rising from the couch with reluctance. James studied her, the playful glint replaced by something deeper. All right, but remember this, the world outside is calling. As she stepped toward the door, Claire turned back to see him watching her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like stars. In that moment, something clicked. Ideas clashed and connected, urgency simmering beneath the surface, and she hesitated for just a heartbeat. Wait, she said, turning around. His smile returned, genuine and warm, as if he had been waiting for her to realize it all along. Then take the leap, Claire. Feeling the weight of the moment, she took a step closer, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I'll think about it, she whispered, before slipping out into the hallway. The air outside felt different, charged with possibility and tension. As she returned to the front desk, a thrill coursed through her veins, mixing with reflections of the night. Claire had turned down his booking, but somehow she had also opened the door to something far greater. In the days that followed, thoughts of James echoed in her mind, his words replaying on a loop that wouldn't fade. The routine of her work suddenly felt stifling, and the ache for adventure pulsed like a heartbeat in her chest. The game was on. And tomorrow, when he returned, she knew she would have to decide if she was ready to embrace the layers he had hinted at, or if she would continue to hide behind the walls she had built for so long. Life was calling, and this time she was determined to answer it. The elegant chandelier above the lobby sparkled like a constellation, casting warm light over the hustle and bustle below. It was a Friday night at the Grand Lake Hotel, and guests were milling about, laughter and lively chatter filling the air. Behind the opulent marble desk, Claire was busy checking in the last wave of guests. Just then, the heavy glass door swung open, and in walked a man who felt like a storm sweeping through the calm. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he cut an impressive figure. His hair was dark and perfectly coiffed, and there was a confidence in his stride that turned heads. Claire's heart fluttered involuntarily, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. It was just another night on the job. She was here to provide a service, not to fawn over guests. Good evening, he said, his voice deep and smooth like honey. Claire replied, her professional mask firmly in place. James Palmer, he said, his eyes holding hers a moment too long, as if daring her to look away. Claire's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The name rang a bell. James Palmer was known in certain circles, a man of power, influence, and perhaps a hint of danger. Mr. Palmer, she said, pulling up his reservation. She felt a knot form in her stomach as she continued, "But I'm afraid I can't accommodate your request for a late check-in." His expression flickered surprise, turned to irritation, then back to charm. "I see. Well, that's unfortunate," he replied, slowly regaining his composure. "I'm truly sorry," Claire said, her tone sincere. It was part of her job to say that, but she meant it. There was something unnerving about denying a man like him. It felt like poking the bear. "Thank you anyway," he said, taking the keycard she handed him with a slight smile of gratitude, layered with something else. Was it challenge or curiosity? "Enjoy your stay," she offered, though she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last she'd see of him. The hours turned and the lobby began to quiet down, with only a few guests lingering over cocktails. Claire busied herself with paperwork, trying to shake off the impression left by James Palmer, but as each minute passed, she felt her thoughts drifting back to him. There was an energy about him that tugged at her curiosity, and she wasn't used to feeling this way about any guest. As midnight approached, the atmosphere shifted, and the hotel felt more intimate, more private. That's when Mark, the bellhop, hopped over to her desk, a jovial spring in his step. "Did you see that guy, Palmer?" Claire rolled her eyes, though a part of her was defensive. "He's not above the rules, Mark." Mark laughed, leaning casually against the desk. "Believe me, a man like him can make things happen." "There's nothing interesting about bending the rules," Claire replied, her voice firm, even as a small part of her whispered for more excitement. Mark smirked, unfazed. "Just you wait. He's the kind of guy who thrives on intrigue. I'm sure he can find excitement elsewhere," she stated, her heart racing at her own defensive comment. As if summoned by her thoughts, the elevator door slid open and James stepped out, casually surveying the lobby. A half-smile appeared on his lips as he walked over, all charm and energy. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks against her will. "What can I do for you, mister?" she asked, forcing professionalism back into her voice. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with a little something," he said, leaning forward slightly, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Could you send some extra towels and perhaps a bottle of that wonderful champagne?" "Of course, mister," she felt the words tumble out, trying to keep a mix of professionalism and personal distance. As she picked up the phone, Mark stepped in next to her, guiding her as they dialed his suite. "You need to watch how you speak to him." Ignoring Mark's playful jab, Claire dispatched the order and returned to organizing the front desk. But just as she was slipping back into her routine, Mark leaned in closer. She asked incredulously, arching an eyebrow. "He's a guest." He held her gaze, unwavering. "And what if doing your job means opening up to new experiences?" She shook her head but couldn't deny the tiny thrill his words sent through her. It felt foreign, exhilarating even, like stepping into an unknown adventure. And in that moment, across the lobby, James turned and caught her eye again, that playful smirk lingering on his lips. Hours later, as the bar began to close and guests dwindled down, Claire found herself lost in her thoughts. She completed her checklists and wondered what it would feel like to step outside the boundaries she'd set for herself. Just then the phone rang again. "This is Mr. Palmer," his voice came, smooth as silk. "Could you bring up that extra ice?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Palmer." She felt her heart race, excitement and apprehension swirling together as she stepped out of the bustling front desk area toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she felt a sudden sense of thrill dance along her spine. Something was shifting inside her. She was stepping into a role she hadn't expected. Would it be so terrible to indulge just a little bit, to let go of the strict boundaries that defined her world? The elevator doors opened, revealing the plush hallway leading to his suite. Claire's breath quickened. This was a territory that felt charged with possibility. She knocked and heard his voice call her in, a warm invitation that made her pulse race. Inside, the room was dimly lit, casting a warm glow over the elegant furnishings. James stood by the expansive window, gazing out at the illuminated city. It struck Claire how striking he looked, an effortless blend of confidence and charm. "Ah, finally," he said, turning with that signature smile. She felt oddly caught up in the moment, the thrill of being alone with him amplifying everything she felt. It was exhilarating to step beyond her professional boundaries. "Just keeping you satisfied, Mr. Palmer," she said lightly, setting the tray down on the bar. "Please call me James," he replied, taking a glass and lifting it in toast. Claire raised her eyebrow, treating the moment carefully. He asked, leaning casually against the bar, the warmth in his voice inviting. "We're both in this vibrant world together." His tone sparked something within her, something reckless and uncharted. The world outside felt so far away, buried beneath layers of responsibility and routine. She felt her resolve falter and an eagerness awaken in its place. Claire asked, a half-smile touching her lips. "Then you'll miss out on an exhilarating experience," James countered smoothly. "You strike me as someone who craves more than just the mundane." For a moment she hesitated, swallowed by the taut tension between them. "By playing the game, Claire," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Let's not pretend we're just two strangers." His words sent a rush of emotions crashing over her, sparking her curiosity and apprehensions in equal measure. She asked, teasing out the challenge. "The game is simple," he said, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. "You just need to embrace who you really are beyond the desk and the rules." Claire found herself trapped in the intensity of his gaze, battling her instincts. This wasn't just a conversation, it was an invitation, a challenge to the walls she had built around herself. "All right," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to let go and to stop seeing me just as a guest," he urged. Taking a deep breath, Claire felt the power of the moment swell around them. Perhaps she was tired not just from work but from confining herself to the mundane. A spark of adventure ignited within her. She said boldly, her heart racing. "I think you'll like where it leads," he said, his voice lowering, charged with urgency. They stood there, suspended in a moment that felt destined. The world beyond seemed distant, and all she could hear was the beat of her own heart as it raced. Claire took a step forward, realizing she had crossed a line, and for the first time felt exhilarated by the choice. "Then let's see where this takes us," she offered, her hesitation dissipating like smoke. In that moment, she let go of every rule she had clung to, every excuse she had whispered to herself. It was time to explore what had been lurking just beneath the surface. James stepped closer, his presence enveloping her, and she could sense that this was only the beginning of their adventure, a dance on the edge of something extraordinary. "Welcome to the game, Claire," he whispered, a promise hidden in his words. As they stood together on the cusp of the unknown, she realized that sometimes embracing the unexpected was exactly what life demanded. In letting go of caution, they were both free to explore uncharted territories, where fantasies could become reality, and the mundane could be transformed into something magnificent. This was only the beginning of a whirlwind adventure that neither of them had anticipated. The lobby of the Elmwood Hotel throbbed with life, filled with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. It was a Friday evening, the kind where stories seemed to come alive in the warmth of shared moments. Behind the sleek, polished front desk stood Claire, a diligent young woman with a charming smile, someone who had perfected the art of handling the chaos that came with checking in guests. But this night felt different. As she went about her regular routine, her heart raced when the heavy glass doors swung open, revealing a man who seemed to be carved from the night itself. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit, he exuded a presence that demanded attention. The way he walked, with an air of confidence and charisma, commanded respect. A hush fell over the lobby as guests turned to steal glances, drawn in like moths to flame. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet brushing against her ears. Claire responded, her professional demeanor in high gear as her fingers danced over the keyboard. "James Palmer," he replied, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Her mind raced as the name registered. James Palmer was not just any guest. He was known in the business world as a force to be reckoned with, a man whose charm often masked a razor-sharp mind. Claire's heart sank slightly as she pulled up his reservation, and with a practiced smile, she handed over the key card. "Mr. Palmer, you're booked into our finest suite." However, Claire hesitated, bracing herself for what was next. "I have to inform you that we cannot accommodate your request for an early check-in." The smile faded from his lips, replaced by a brief flicker of surprise before his charming mask returned. "Is that so? I hoped for a smoother arrival," he said, his tone flipping from disappointment to charm in mere seconds. "I truly apologize," Claire offered, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. She had seen how men like him operated and wasn't about to back down. He accepted the key card with an easy smile that sent butterflies dancing in her stomach. "Thank you." The polite response was framed with a hint of something deeper, a challenge perhaps. As he turned to leave, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that their interaction wasn't just over. Hours passed, and while Claire managed check-ins and inquiries, her thoughts drifted back to James. There was a magnetic pull about him that left her questioning. Who was he beyond the suave exterior? As she finished her shift, she leaned against the desk only to witness him laughing with friends at the bar, an easy charm dancing in the air around him. Mark, the bellhop, sauntered over, a mischievous grin plastered on his face. "So you turned down Mr. Palmer's request, huh? Bold move." Claire rolled her eyes, trying not to think about the way he held her gaze. "It's my job to enforce the rules, Mark." Mark chuckled, leaning on the counter. "Yeah, well, you might want to be careful." Their banter continued as laughter bubbled around them, but Claire remained unwavering. When it came to her job, she had to draw the line somewhere. Yet every now and then she glanced toward the bar, catching flashes of that smile, that hint of charisma that seemed genuinely inviting. Just as she was about to dismiss him completely, her phone rang. "This is Mr. Palmer," his voice came through the line, silky and calm, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "I was wondering if you could send up some extra pillows and perhaps a bottle of champagne." "Of course," she replied, surprised by her own heartbeat racing more than usual. Was it the thrill of aiding a guest or something deeper? As she hung up the phone, Mark leaned in closer. "Of course not," she replied, sharper than intended. The flutter in her gut tightened as she dashed toward the elevator, the anticipation bubbling up like the champagne she was about to send. With each floor she ascended, the atmosphere shifted. It felt charged, the fading sounds of the lobby replaced by the quiet hum of the upper floors. When she reached his penthouse, she took a deep breath, adjusting her uniform and trying to compose herself. A mix of excitement and nervousness swirled inside her. Pushing the door open, the soft glow of his suite enveloped her. The room was luxurious, the kind of space that made you feel like you'd stepped into another world. He stood near the window, gazing out over the city skyline, the lights sparkling like jewels. "Ah, my ice has arrived," James said, turning to face her. A warm smile lit up his face, and Claire felt her heart skip a beat. The way he looked at her made the surrounding luxury feel insignificant. She set the pillows and champagne down on the coffee table, trying to keep the conversation professional. "Is there anything else I can help you with tonight, Mr. Call Me James?" he said, taking a small step closer. The air thickened between them, charged with something unnameable. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. His voice dipped, a playful challenge lacing his words. "We both know this isn't just about duties and roles." She felt a rush of heat creep up her neck, the unaccustomed buzz of attraction igniting her senses. "Think about it," he said, his eyes glimmering with mischief. "You turned down my request, and yet here you are making sure I have everything I need. Why not embrace that?" Claire felt the weight of his words settle around her like the warm glow of the city's lights. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, but now, standing in front of him, the edges began to blur. "Maybe I was afraid to cross that line," she said, surprising even herself with the honesty. James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There was a silence that lingered, stretching like an elastic band between them. Claire's heart raced. She had heard tales about men like him. They played games, danced around feelings, but he was offering her so much more, an invitation into a world where she could be more than just the hotel clerk. "I don't know if I can," she said, finding her voice barely above a whisper. He pressed, his deep gaze unwavering. "You're already halfway there just by being here. What if you let go just for tonight?" Claire felt a shiver of fear mixed with excitement race through her. Could she really abandon the expectations that had kept her tethered so long? The very fear of losing control gripped her. "Let's discover it together," he said, offering her a half-smile that threatened to unravel her resolve. She pondered the notion of letting go, surrendering herself to possibilities instead of opting for safety. The world outside felt vibrant, alive, as if inviting her to take a leap. The boundaries of her life began to blur. In that moment, the challenge whispered to her, the urge to step outside her structured existence. "Fine," she said boldly, her voice steadying. "Wonderful," he replied, his eyes shining with approval. "Just relax and be yourself." "Okay," Claire breathed, letting the barriers she constructed begin to crumble piece by piece. He stepped back, allowing her to reclaim her space, and yet the pull between them remained electric. He suggested, pouring them both a glass of champagne. They clinked their glasses, and the moment stretched, filled with potential and unspoken promises. Claire felt the thrill of excitement pulse through her veins, a rush that was both terrifying and liberating. As they took a sip, something in the air shifted. Rumors around the hotel began to dissolve, the chaos of her life blurring into the background. They were no longer just hotel staff and guests, they were two people on the precipice of something new and exhilarating. "You're even more intriguing than I thought," James said, his voice low as he set down his glass. "But you didn't choose this life for nothing." "I think I have always wanted more," she admitted, surprised by her own vulnerability. He urged gently. He leaned closer, and her heart raced in response. They were both floating closer to a dangerous edge, yet the thrill thrilled her. She said, her voice softening. He reached out, brushing his fingers against her hand, and she felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her. Looking into his eyes, she felt something unlock within her, a craving for adventure, for freedom. "All right, let's do it," she said, her voice full of newfound confidence. James beamed, and in that moment everything shifted. There were two stars intertwining in that hotel room, spinning toward an exhilarating future, leaving behind the safety of darkness. "Let's explore this city," he said, a contagious enthusiasm lighting up his face. "What do you say?" In a heartbeat, Claire realized how much she craved that freedom. "Let's go," she said, her spirit igniting with joy. Together, they stepped back into the lively embrace of the bustling streets, where every heartbeat echoed with the possibilities of adventure. As they roamed the city, Claire felt alive in a way she hadn't known before. Laughter bubbled between them, the night unfolding like a fascinating story waiting to be told. And with every moment spent together, her walls fell further away while her heart grew bolder. In the end, it turned out to be a night filled with magic, surprise, and the thrill of uncharted paths. They were not simply a guest and a desk clerk anymore. They had become two travelers navigating life, choosing to embrace the unknown together. Standing on the rooftop of the city, beneath a sky sprinkled with stars, Claire realized it wasn't just about breaking the rules. It was about discovering parts of herself she had long buried deep inside. The night was alive, and so was she, ready to begin a new chapter, emboldened by the chance encounter that had ignited her spirit. In that moment, she knew she had stepped into a realm where boundaries blurred, where reality transformed into adventure, and she was finally ready to take that leap. Together, they danced to the rhythm of the night, indelibly linked by a moment that would change both their lives forever. Claire's fingers danced nervously over the keyboard, the cool glow of the computer screen reflecting in her eyes. The lobby of the Grandview Hotel was alive with chatter, laughter, and the sweet scent of fresh flowers that adorned the reception. This evening was a typical busy Saturday night, filled with couples celebrating anniversaries and families checking in for a weekend escape. But as Claire glanced up, her heart skipped a beat at the sight of him. Standing there was a man who seemed to command the room, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit that accentuated his tall frame. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and the charisma radiating from him felt almost palpable. Guests turned their heads, the air turned electric. Claire felt an odd flutter in her stomach as he approached the desk, and she quickly reminded herself to appear professional. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and resonant. She managed to ask, maintaining eye contact, though it threatened to unstead her. Claire's fingers hesitated over the keyboard, the name resonating deeply in her memory. James Palmer was known in business circles for his ruthless negotiation tactics and his uncanny ability to charm anyone he met. "Mr. Palmer," she confirmed, typing his name while her heart raced. As she handed him the key, she hesitated. "Must inform you we can't accommodate your request for an early check-in." The smile on his face faltered just for a moment, revealing a flicker of annoyance before his charming demeanor returned. "That's unfortunate," he replied, his voice smooth yet edged with disappointment. "Honestly, I'm really sorry," Claire said, her tone firm but empathetic. "Very well," James replied, taking the key card from her hand with a slight nod. As he turned to leave, she felt an inexplicable pull between them. There was something magnetic in the way he held himself, something that made her question her instincts. "Enjoy your stay, mister," she called out, perhaps a bit too eagerly. The night wore on, but Claire couldn't shake thoughts of James from her mind. As she checked in the final few guests, she could feel his presence lingering amid the buzz of the lobby. The way he had looked at her made her feel both flattered and cautious. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She had work to do, after all. Half an hour later, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Claire was about to take a much-needed break when Mark, the bellhop, approached with a smirk. "Did you really turn down Mr. Palmer's request?" She shot him a glare, crossing her arms defensively. "He's just a guest like everyone else," he teased, leaning casually against the desk. "Just wait." Their banter continued, but Claire tried to ignore the fluttering in her stomach at the name James Palmer. Just then the phone rang, breaking her concentration. Picking it up, she recognized his voice instantly. "Claire," he began, the warmth of his voice sending a ripple of butterflies through her. "Could you send up some extra ice?" "Of course, Mr. Palmer," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. As she hung up the phone, Mark leaned in closer. "You know, I think a man like him would expect a little more special treatment." "I'm not easing up on anything," Claire insisted, but even as she said it, the weight of the night pressed on her. The thrill in the air was palpable. Her heart quickened as she grabbed the bottle of champagne and a bucket of ice from the back, preparing to head up to his suite. Taking a deep breath, Claire rode the elevator to the penthouse. As the doors opened, the plush carpeting stretched out before her like an invitation to step into a new world. She approached his room, adrenaline thrumming through her veins. The door stood slightly ajar. She gave it a soft knock. "Come in," came his smooth voice. Pushing the door open, she stepped into the dimly lit room, the soft glow of city lights flooding in through the enormous windows. There he was, leaning casually against the bar, glass in hand, exuding an effortless charm. "Ah, the ice has arrived," he said, his smile both charming and disarming. "Just doing my job, Mr. Palmer," she replied, forcing professionalism back into her voice. "Call me James," he insisted, his eyes twinkling with mischief. She smiled despite herself, feeling the tension in the air shift. As she set the champagne and ice down, their fingers brushed ever so slightly, sending a shiver through her. "Thanks for bringing this up," he said, pouring himself a glass. "It has its moments," Claire replied, aware that their conversation was crossing into personal territory. "Routine can get dull." James leaned in, his gaze unwavering. A dusting of nervousness shot through her, but she didn't allow it to show. "Why not? Life is fleeting, and you have the chance to experience so much more," he replied, taking a casual sip. At that moment, the room felt charged like the air before a summer storm. Claire's pulse quickened. She echoed, torn between the comforting borders she had drawn around her life and the intoxicating pull of the unknown. "Imagine just stepping outside the confines of routine," he coaxed, stepping even closer. Suddenly, Claire found herself grappling with a choice that lay between her carefully constructed life and the thrill he represented. "I've always played by the rules," she suggested, trying to maintain some distance. He challenged softly, the question lingering in the air. Before she could respond, the moment crystallized, pulsing with a mix of excitement and fear. What if this was an opportunity, an invitation to step beyond her comfort zone? Just then, Mark's voice echoed in her head, "Be careful." And yet, beneath the caution, a flicker of bravery ignited deep within her. "All right," she finally said, summoning courage. James's eyes lit up like fireworks against the night sky. "That's the spirit." Claire felt the weight of the moment wrap around her like a warm cloak. They clinked their glasses together, and something shifted in her, a transformation beginning to unfurl. As evening melted into night, they shared laughter and dreams, each story tumbling out more freely than the last. The champagne flowed, loosening the grip of Claire's inhibitions. For the first time, she felt like she was living, not just existing behind the desk where rules dictated her every move. She asked, a playful glint in her eye. "Only the interesting ones," he replied, leaning closer, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret. She felt her cheeks flush. "I've always been focused on work," James challenged gently, holding her gaze. Claire felt the ground shifting beneath her. She countered, curiosity knitting her brow. "Because I see more than just the hotel clerk," he murmured, his intensity wrapping around her like a warm embrace. "You're not just a name on the reservations list." That admiration took her by surprise. "Sometimes simple is what we need," he replied, his voice smooth yet firm. "Let's strip it down to what it ought to be. No titles, no expectations, just you and me." The simplicity of the invitation filled the air with a thrilling kind of tension. As they stood there, it was as if the world had shrunk down to this moment, leaving everything else behind. Claire could feel the urge to take a leap, to break loose from her restraints. "Okay," she said, letting her guard fall. James's smile widened, his eyes sparkling. With that, the evening expanded, each moment filled with revelations. They stepped beyond small talk, plunging into deeper conversations about life, dreams, fears, and everything in between. "I've rarely met a woman who challenges me like you do," he confessed, leaning back, the ambience around them growing warmer. She teased, a playful spark igniting in her. "Not at all," he replied. The two continued to chatter, their words weaving together like a tapestry of possibility. In those rhythmic exchanges filled with laughter and the spark of connection, Claire felt herself beginning to transform. Time felt fluid, slipping through their fingers like grains of sand, but in that moment, she didn't care. The clock ticked on, spirits soaring as the boundaries of her reality melded with private dreams. They were spinning through the night, and with each shared glance, the promise of unpredictability drew them closer. As the evening wore on, Claire felt braver, freer, and somehow more alive. Together, they left the confines of the hotel room, ready to explore a world filled with possibilities. "We don't have to go far," James suggested as they stepped into the city night. Breathless with anticipation, Claire nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The crisp night air was refreshing as they wandered through the empty streets, a newfound sense of freedom enveloping them. He asked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I'm ready," Claire replied, feeling a surge of joy. This was different. This was her stepping into a narrative where she wasn't just a supporting character. As they roamed, Claire discovered hidden gems of the city, places she had never noticed before. They shared stories, her aspirations, his successes, and with each moment, they were building an unspoken connection. The boundaries of their previous roles melted away like ice in the warmth of their laughter. With every turn, they ventured further into the heart of the night, and Claire felt herself bloom, shedding the layers she had once worn as armor. Surrounded by glowing city lights, she recognized herself in this unfamiliar territory, learning not just about him, but about who she was becoming. Eventually, they found themselves back at the hotel, standing beneath the luxurious facade, the thrill of the night wrapping around them like a treasured secret. James looked into her eyes, no longer just the charming businessman, but someone who had seen her truth. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly, his smile genuine. Claire felt a rush of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you for pushing me." They stood close, the electricity in the air undeniable. In that moment, Claire knew she had stepped beyond the routine of her life, daring to let the world spin into possibilities. James asked, his gaze steady. Without hesitation, she nodded. As she turned to head inside, the night still hummed with potential. Claire felt the weight of her past slowly dissipating, and she smiled at the thought of her future. She had taken a leap that evening, one that had transformed her life forever. In the simplest way possible, she had broken free from her constraints, stepping into a realm where rules could bend and adventure awaited. And all it took was one man, one moment, and a decision to embrace the unknown. Her life would never be the same again. The lobby of the Ravenwood Hotel was alive with the warmth of lights and laughter. It was a bustling Friday evening, filled with travelers from all walks of life, each with their own stories woven into the fabric of this grand establishment. Claire stood behind the reception desk, her fingers deftly handling the check-in process while her mind drifted to the possibilities of the weekend ahead. Everything seemed ordinary until the large glass doors swung open. A gust of cool evening air rushed in, and in walked a man who was anything but ordinary. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he moved with a kind of confident grace that drew every eye in the room, including Claire's. He was striking, a tall silhouette against the golden lights, with dark hair that framed an angular face adorned with piercing blue eyes. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth like silk as he approached the desk. The thrill of his presence sent an unexpected shiver down Claire's spine as she straightened up. She managed to ask, keeping her composure. "James Palmer," he replied, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. She had heard whispers of this name in high-end circles, a man of substantial influence and wealth, someone who cut through barriers like a hot knife through butter. With a few quick keystrokes, she pulled up his reservation and did her best to maintain professionalism. "Mr. Palmer, your suite is ready." "However," she said, the words hanging in the air like an unwelcome guest, "I regret to inform you that we can't accommodate your request for an early check-in." For a fleeting moment, disappointment flickered across his face before he smoothed it over with practiced ease. "Is that so? I'm truly sorry," Claire replied, her voice steady but empathetic. "Thank you," he replied simply. There was no further irritation, just a calm acceptance which only heightened her curiosity. As he turned to walk away, Claire couldn't shake the strange feeling that this was not the last time she would see him that night. As the hours passed, Claire watched James from a distance as he mingled with other guests at the bar. He laughed easily, his charm flowing like champagne, leaving a trail of captivated listeners. And yet, the glances exchanged between them held a deeper significance. She couldn't deny her intrigue. "Seems like Mr. Palmer's getting quite the reception," Mark, the bellhop, commented as he sauntered over, a knowing grin plastered on his face. "You turned down his request." "I was just doing my job," she replied, trying to sound indifferent, but a tiny spark of nerves coursed through her. "Oh, come on," Mark teased. "He's the kind of guy who's used to getting what he wants. Just wait." And just like that, the clock had barely struck 10 when the phone rang and Claire's heart skipped again. "This is Mr. Palmer," came his calm, alluring voice. "I was wondering if you could send up some extra pillows and maybe a bottle of that champagne I ordered." "Yes, of course, Mr. Palmer," she replied, her heart fluttering in her chest. Mark leaned in closer, eyebrows raised. "I'm just fulfilling his request," she shot back, even though small pangs of excitement stirred within her. What was all this about? Why was she feeling so moved by a guest's voice? With each passing moment, Claire shook off her thoughts and focused on making the arrangements. She took the champagne and pillows up with her, riding the elevator to his floor, anticipation coursing through her veins. When she reached his suite, she took a deep breath and knocked at the door, her heart racing. "Mister," she called out, feeling the weight of the moment. "Come in," he replied, the warmth in his voice enveloping her as she pushed the door open. The suite was luxurious, with the kind of decor that engulfed you in comfort. James stood by the window, looking out at the glimmering cityscape, the lights twinkling like stars scattered across the ground. He turned slowly, his charming smile illuminating the space even further. "Ah, my ice has arrived," he said, his eyes dancing with delight. Claire approached, setting the pillows and champagne down on the table. Their fingers brushed briefly as she did so, sending a jolt of electricity between them that caught her off guard. "Thank you," he said, genuine appreciation in his tone. Her cheeks flushed slightly and she quickly regained her composure. "Equally, that may not be the best approach with someone like me," he said, his smile turning playful. She asked, a touch of defiance sneaking into her voice. The challenge hung between them, thick and palpable. Claire felt the pulse of excitement and danger. Was he flirting, or was this something more serious? Before she could respond, he continued, "Imagine letting go of the rules for just one night." She hesitated, heart racing. "Of course you have responsibilities," he said, his tone shifting to something softer, almost coaxing. "But what's wrong with enjoying yourself just a little?" The tension in the air thickened as Claire felt a mix of caution and yearning. How often had she let opportunities slip away? What if embracing this moment offered her something wonderful? "Okay," she finally said, surprising herself with her own boldness. James's face broke into a wide smile, showing genuine delight. "Now that's a start." He poured 2 glasses of champagne and raised a toast. As they clinked their glasses together, Claire could feel her heart thrumming in time with the vibrant pulse of the room. It was as if the world outside had started to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble untouched by reality. The conversation flowed freely, layered with laughter and moments where silences spoke volumes. Claire found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She shared dreams long tucked away, whispered fears and unvoiced aspirations, the alcohol loosening the restraints that held her back. James listened intently, his eyes glimmering with genuine interest. "You have a lovely way of seeing the world," he said softly. Another toast swept them deeper into the night, the atmosphere charged with possibility. As they veered into more personal territory, Claire felt more alive than ever. "I've wanted to travel," she admitted. James suggested, his voice low and inviting. She hesitated, taking a sip of her champagne, considering the notion. "Why not? Life doesn't wait for anyone. You deserve to embrace every moment," he urged gently. Claire sank into his gaze, feeling both drawn to him and wary of what it might mean. She had spent so much time being responsible, playing by the rules. Maybe it was time to break free. "Maybe I'm afraid of losing control," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes losing control can lead to the most exhilarating experiences," he replied, his tone coaxing her onward. With the night unfurling around them like a glorious tapestry, Claire felt exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steadier than before. James's eyes sparkled with mischief. They stepped out of the hotel, the cool breeze wrapping around them like an embrace. Under a sky glittering with stars, Claire felt something shift inside her, a subtle unlocking of potential, a path to something greater unfurling at her feet. He asked, glancing sideways at her with an expectant smile. "I want to dance," she said impulsively, laughing at how exhilarating it felt to speak her truth. he replied. As they wandered through the streets hand in hand, laughter spiraled up into the night. They stumbled upon a small, tucked-away jazz club, music spilling out into the street like a promise. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, the sound of trumpets and melodies filling the air. James asked, a twinkle in his eye. Always, she replied breathlessly, letting instinct guide her steps. They slipped onto the dance floor, and the world around them faded away into the rhythm of the music. As they swayed, her body felt light, each beat pulling her in deeper. The connection between them was electric, vibrant, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. With every twirl and dip, Claire forgot everything: responsibilities, expectations, and fears, immersing herself in the raw joy of the moment. James said, beaming as he spun her around. More than I ever expected, she admitted, her heart soaring. As the music played on, they danced until time lost meaning. It was liberation in its purest form, an embrace of life that set her spirit ablaze. Later, as they stepped back into the night air, the coolness draped around them like a protective layer. I didn't know I could feel like that, Claire said, breathless and full of wonder. Life is meant to be lived in those moments, James replied, his voice low and earnest. When they returned to the hotel, the night had transformed Claire. She had stepped outside her norms, pushing past the barriers she had built around herself. As they reached his suite, Claire knew that the evening was winding down, but something unspoken lingered between them. Thank you for tonight, she said softly, genuinely grateful. Thank you for embracing it with me, he replied, his gaze steady and sincere. In that moment, Claire felt a sense of belonging that transcended the walls they had both come from. He asked, his expression serious. Don't let this be the end of your adventures. I won't forget, she promised, feeling the truth of those words resonate deep within. With a lingering look, Claire stepped back, a bittersweet silence enveloping them. She had transformed in ways she hadn't expected, and this evening would forever remain etched in her memory, a reminder of the vibrant threads that life could weave. In a world that often felt rigid and constrained, she had dared to step beyond, to embrace the challenges and the joys that lay waiting in the unknown. And as she walked away, heart full and spirit soaring, she knew that the evening wasn't just about the chance encounter with James, it was about discovering herself and the freedom that awaited anyone brave enough to seize it. She glanced back one last time. Claire knew she had turned down more than just a booking that night. She had turned on the light to a world full of infinite possibilities, each one shimmering like the stars above, waiting to be explored. It was a vibrant Friday night at the prestigious Grand View Hotel, filled with the laughter of guests and the soft clinking of glasses as they toasted to the weekend ahead. Claire stood at the reception desk, her eyes scanning the lobby while handling a steady stream of check-ins. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood, melding into an atmosphere of luxury. Then everything shifted. The heavy glass doors swung open, and in walked a man who seemed to cast a shadow over the entire room. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he moved with an effortless grace that drew every eye, including Claire's. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his piercing blue eyes held a spark of something both intriguing and dangerous. "Good evening," he said, his voice rich and smooth as he approached the desk, an easy smile playing on his lips. Claire asked, her fingers pausing for just a moment over the keyboard. "James Palmer," he replied. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She knew that name. He was a well-known figure, often associated with high-stakes deals and lavish parties. This wasn't just any guest, he was someone who commanded attention. "Mr. Palmer," Claire said, pulling up his reservation and keeping her professional demeanor intact. "You're booked into our finest suite." Her heart raced a little as she spoke the next words. "I'm afraid we can't accommodate your request for an early check-in." The smile faltered momentarily before he regained his composure, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "That's unfortunate. I truly apologize," Claire replied, her voice steady but sympathetic. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, his voice almost too smooth. As he turned to leave, Claire felt a strange pull toward him, an instinctive sense that this wouldn't be the last they saw of each other that night. As the hours passed, Claire busied herself with the usual tasks, but her thoughts kept drifting to James. He was easy to spot even among the crowd at the bar where he laughed with friends, the sound deep and infectious. There was something enchanting about him, a charisma that made the air around him crackle. Mark, the bellhop, sidled up beside her, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Did you really turn down Mr. Palmer's request for an early check-in?" "I'm just doing my job," she said, crossing her arms. "Sure, but this guy, he's the type who usually gets what he wants. Just wait." Claire barely had a chance to respond when the phone rang. She picked it up and the familiarity of his voice echoed on the other end. "Hello, this is Mr. Palmer. Could you send up some extra pillows and maybe a bottle of your finest champagne?" "Of course, Mr. Palmer," she replied, feeling an unfamiliar flutter in her stomach. Mark nudged her playfully, a knowing grin on his face. "I'm just fulfilling a request," she countered, her pulse quickening as she gathered the items from the back. The elevator ride to his suite felt electric, a mix of anticipation and anxiety swirling in her chest. She took a slow, deep breath, reminding herself to remain professional. When the doors opened, she approached his room and knocked softly. "Come in," he called out. Pushing the door open, Claire stepped into the opulent suite, her heart racing. The dim, inviting light wrapped around her, and there he stood, a glass of whiskey in hand, gazing out the window at the city below. "Ah, my ice has arrived," he said, turning toward her with that same charming smile. "Just your pillows and champagne," she corrected, setting them on the coffee table. As she did, their hands brushed, and a rush of warmth shot through her. She quickly pulled away, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you, Claire," he said, his tone uncharacteristically warm. "I suppose," she replied, trying to keep the conversation professional. "Just your company," he said, a playful glint in his eye. "Let's toast, shall we?" Claire hesitated for a heartbeat, caught off guard by his invitation. Part of her screamed to maintain boundaries, while another part, the one tugged by curiosity, wanted to see what unfolded. "I really can't," she said, holding her breath as she took a half step back. "Why not?" His gaze intensified, and for an instant she felt completely seen. "Because I have a job to do," she insisted, but the words felt weak even as they left her mouth. "Think of it this way, a moment like this could be something you'll never forget." With that, the room went still, and Claire felt the weight of his words sinking in. What if he was right? What if stepping outside her boundaries could lead to something remarkable? "Oh, come on," Mark's earlier words echoed in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she decided to relinquish caution for a moment. "All right," she relented, her heart pounding. James's face lit up with delight. "Now that's the spirit." As they raised their glasses, the atmosphere shifted, thick with unspoken possibilities. Claire could feel the electric pulse of the moment as their glasses met. "Here's to adventure and stepping outside of the box," she said, feeling a thrill course through her. Later, as the evening progressed, Claire found herself lost in conversation with James. They laughed, joked, and shared stories like old friends, and with each passing moment, Claire felt a little more liberated. She asked, a playful smile dancing on her lips. "Only when the opportunity arises," he replied, a glint of mischief lurking in his eyes. Claire teased, caught up in the playful banter. "It's more about the heart and spirit I see in you," he replied, locking eyes with her, making her heart race. As the evening continued, they delved deeper into their dreams, aspirations, and fears, each revealing a bit of vulnerability that felt refreshing. Claire found herself opening up about her desire to break free from work and travel the world experiences she had set aside for too long. James asked, his voice soft and encouraging. "The routine, I suppose, it keeps me grounded," she answered, but even as she said it, she realized how easy it was for her to hide behind that excuse. He suggested. Claire considered his words, the pulse of excitement racing through her. What did she have to lose? Did it truly matter if she bent the rules for one night? "All right," she said slowly, the sense of liberation washing over her. James's smile deepened, his eyes shimmering with approval. They ventured out into the vibrant nightlife, hand in hand, the city bent under a canopy of stars glowing above. As they walked through the crowded streets, laughter and music enveloped them. "This is what life should feel like," he said, his gaze focused on her, animated by the joy of the moment. Claire felt a rush of freedom surge through her veins, as if she had stepped out of a cocoon. "You're right," she agreed, taking a deep breath as they stumbled upon an outdoor festival, where lights twinkled above like a billion fireflies. He asked, his expression inviting. "Always," she replied, her voice laced with newfound confidence. They spent hours wandering through the festival, sampling street food, dancing under twinkling lights, and losing themselves in the moment. Time blurred around them, each heartbeat echoing with the thrill of laughter and connection. "See. Life is too short to hold back," he said, spinning her around in a silly dance as uproarious laughter broke the night air. It was in that moment that Claire understood the thrill of letting go, of giving herself permission to be impulsive and free. Each taste of food, each dance move, each shared glance filled her with unquenchable joy. As the night neared its end, Claire felt more alive than ever, filled with a warmth she hadn't realized she craved. They found themselves back at the hotel, standing beneath the illuminated facade, an air of intimacy between them thickening the space. "Thank you for pushing me to experience this," Claire said, her voice genuine. "The night's not over yet," he replied, the weight of his gaze heavy with promise. Before she could respond, Claire heard the faint ding of the elevator nearby. Instinctively, she turned, nearly losing her footing. She glanced back at James, caught between wonderment and anxiety all at once. As the doors opened, a couple stepped out, their laughter echoing through the hallway, temporarily breaking the moment. Claire felt a rush of uncertainty ripple through her, the thrill of the evening suddenly colliding with reality. Mark's voice rang out from behind them. "You'll never guess what," and as he turned the corner, his eyes widened, locking onto James. "Sir." The formality of the greeting hung in the air like a newly drawn line between them, reality crashing back down amid the fantasy they had woven through the night. Claire's heart raced, the spark of adventure doused in an unexpected wave of tension. Just then, a sudden realization struck Claire. Would calling him sir elevate him back to a status that would change everything they had built in a single night? James turned to her in curious expression in his eyes, the moment teetering perilously between everything they had shared and the boundaries that still loomed ahead. "Let's talk," he said, the gentle authority in his tone pulling Claire closer yet again, as if to bridge the gap created by formality. But the distance had changed everything. The spell of the night hung in the air, thick with uncertainty and anticipation, a cliffhanger that had them both teetering at the edge, waiting to see if they would leap, or if they would be pulled back into the mundane reality of life once more. The door to adventure felt perilously close, yet frightfully far away, as they stood frozen in that pivotal moment, caught between what had been and what could still be. Claire's heart thudded in her chest, brimming with hope and fear, as they waited for the next breath that would determine their fate.